Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your time today. Welcome to another Share Cafe webinar. We have a subject today that's a little bit out there, but it's been a subject that's attracted plenty of press and controversy and discussion in recent weeks. The topic of medicinal psychedelics is significant for a number of reasons. Globally, we're seeing a number of companies conducting clinical trials for psychedelic treatments for everything from depression to Ptsd. And some have received the blessing of the US FDA. This has created a legal way for companies to conduct research on otherwise illegal drugs, and that's opened the door for public listings, particularly in Canada. Firstly, today we have an Australian expert, Mr. Peter Hunt, who will discuss the use of psychedelics in the treatment of mental illnesses. Then we'll look at the investment opportunity within the psychedelics industry with some presentations from some Canadian companies. And in the years since cannabis became legal for recreational use in Canada, the world of psychedelics has also been attracting a number of cannabis executives who see it as the next frontier for therapeutic innovation. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Peter Hunt. Both Peter and his wife, Tanya De Jong, established Mind Medicine Australia, which is a charity. It enables the development of regulatory approved and research-backed psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of mental ill health in Australia. Thank you for your time, Peter. Over to you.
That's great, Tim. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'm delighted to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you about these therapies. For those who don't know me, I come from an investment banking background, but have been spending about the last 10 years focused on solving social problems. We set up Mind Medicine Australia 18 months ago because we see these therapies as a game changer. In this presentation, I'm going to cover three broad areas. Firstly, the problem, the size of the problem, because that obviously leads to the size of the opportunity. Secondly, I'm going to explain why we are so enthusiastic about these therapies, why we do see them as a game changer. And thirdly, and Tim touched upon it, the emergence that we're seeing of for-profit companies in North America and Europe and the momentum that's building in the sector. Now, this first slide is all about the size of the problem in Australia. 1 in 5 Australian adults have a chronic mental health condition. And that's a statistic straight out of the Interim Productivity Commission report of last November. On the right-hand side, you'll see that almost 1 in 2 of us will suffer from a mental health condition at some stage during our lives. And in the middle, you'll see some stats which I think are truly dreadful. And that is that 1 in 8 of us are now on antidepressants and 1 in 4 of our older people. So we're basically numbing our older people. That's an 18% increase over 5 years and a 95% increase over 15 years. Now, in any other sector of Australia, if you were seeing a massive increase in something and it wasn't actually leading to improvements in outcomes, you'd start wondering why. So this presentation is all about, in part, why that's happening. At the bottom, you'll see some of the major classes of mental illness, PTSD, other anxiety disorders, depression and substance abuse. And I've listed them there because the trials to date have shown remarkable remission rates in relation to those categories of mental illness. So next slide, please. Whilst we're talking about 1 in 5 Australians, if you actually look at certain populations in Australia, the figures are even worse. And the one that really stands out is ADF veterans, where the stats are truly dreadful. And one of the worst stats, and you'll see the bottom line of that table, is comorbidities at 52%. In other words, that people have multiple mental illness problems, and that becomes incredibly hard to treat. Next slide, please. Mental illness in our society creates enormous weight. It not only affects sufferers and their families and carers, but it also leads to unemployment, a lack of productivity, and a lack of sociability amongst those who are affected. It's the primary cause of suicide, and it's the primary cause of homelessness. So, if we could solve this problem, our society would dramatically improve for the better. In terms of costs, the costs of mental illness to Australia are truly stratospheric. These are figures straight out of the Productivity Commission. You'll see their aggregate cost of mental illness to our economy on an annual basis at about $180 billion. So absolutely enormous. Next slide, please. The elephant in the room when you talk about mental illness is actually not lack of government funding. It's not lack of patient access gateways, and it's not lack of process inefficiencies. And, you know, every one of those items could be improved, but that's not the fundamental reason we've got a problem in terms of the size of the problem. The fundamental reason is that actually the treatment paradigms just aren't working for many, many people in Australia. And we've seen very little innovation in the sector now for nearly 50 years. If you take depression, only 35% of sufferers gain remission, in other words, get well, from pharmaceuticals and/or psychotherapy. So, you know, the getting well rate is only about a third of the people who suffer from depression. Whilst the response rate, in other words, there is some improvement, covers a lot more people, that response rate actually carries with it a burden. And the burden is this, that it can have, antidepressants can have very nasty side effects. And when you stop treatment, in other words, you stop your psychotherapy or you stop taking antidepressants, what you often find is a terrible or really high relapse rate. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is even worse. There you're talking about response rates with current therapies of only about 20 to 30%, and remission rates getting well way below that. So, you know, it's no wonder that we're seeing the suicide rates that we're seeing in this country. The point I want to make here is, you know, we can go on believing that we can solve this problem with the current modalities, but we're kidding ourselves. And if anything, it's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse because the pace of change is accelerating. We all know that. Technology is leading to job insecurity. We're seeing a breakdown in our communities. If we simply try to stand still with current modalities, the chances are the mental illness issues in our society are going to get worse. So next slide, please. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on two fundamental therapies. That's medicinal psilocybin for depression and medicinal Ndma therapy for PTSD. These are different therapies, and I'll explain the differences a bit later in the presentation. Whilst the focus is on depression and PTSD, these therapies are also showing remarkable prospectivity for obsessive compulsive disorder, addiction, and a number of other mental illnesses like anorexia. The beauty of these therapies, and the thing that stands them apart, is that we're only talking about 2 to 3 sessions with the medicines. So it's a relatively short treatment paradigm and with a remarkably high remission rate. In a medically controlled environment, it's extremely safe. So all the stigma stories you hear about, put them aside, because in a hospital clinic environment, these medicines are very safe and they're not addictive. And as Tim touched upon at the start, both medicines now have breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA in America, which means they are highly prospective and they're being fast-tracked in that country through to becoming prescribable medicine. Next slide, please. The way the therapy broadly works is this, is that it takes place in a hospital or a clinic environment. That room you see in the bottom right-hand corner is actually in a hospital, but it's decked out to make the patient feel really comfortable. There are 3 stages to the therapy. There's the preparatory sessions, where the patient is made to feel comfortable and it interacts in a positive way with the therapists. Then you have the acute medicinal session, and then you have integration sessions after that, where the patient and the therapist talk about the experience which the patient went through. So say it's facilitated by psychiatrists and therapists. It emphasizes non-avoidance and curiosity, and it commonly creates a self-awareness in the patient. And it's that self-awareness which is the start of the road to recovery. Next slide, please. For those who love data, this is the critical data page. There's a scale that psychologists and psychiatrists often use to measure treatment effectiveness, and it's called the Cohen's D scale. And the way it works is that 0.2 is low treatment effectiveness, 0.5 is medium treatment effectiveness, and 0.8 is large treatment effectiveness. And when you look at the bottom, you'll see that antidepressants have a D factor, or treatment effectiveness of 0.3, which means they are very low in terms of treatment effectiveness, which is completely at odds with how widely they're being used in our society. When you look at the stats or the above for psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA, you'll see that the treatment effectiveness is actually off the charts. It's right in the sort of large treatment benefit area, so very effective. Next slide, please. Okay, I said before that I'd explain the difference between psilocybin therapy for depression and MDMA therapy for PTSD. With psilocybin, the medicine literally takes you into a completely altered state of consciousness, where for the space of 6 or 7 hours, you literally are going in and out of a completely different world. The beauty of this therapy is that what it does is it really minimizes the sense of self during the experience. And if you think about depression, the sense of self is what's causing all the problems, because the person with depression is ruminating about things like, I've got no future, no one loves me, I don't know what my purpose is, I don't feel good about life, I don't feel good about friendships. It's that self-rumination that's actually causing the fundamental problem with depression. It's a lack of real meaning in life. You'll see on the right-hand side, 2 charts or 2 circles. These are replications or representations of people going through fMRI scans. The one on the right is the placebo, where you'll see that there's actually very little happening in terms of connections across the brain. It's really indicative of that self-rumination that I was talking about, that focus on self rather than connection. On the left-hand side, what you're seeing is a brain under psilocybin that's completely coming alive, where connections are being made right across the brain, where neurogenesis is happening. And the beauty of that is that when the patient comes out of the experience, the overwhelming sensation is one of connectedness, feeling connected with everything. And it's that which is the start of recovery, that sense of I'm connected with everything rather than I'm disconnected from the world. Next slide, please. Okay, now to remission rates that we're seeing in trials, and these are incredibly impressive. I frankly don't get that interested in response rates, because I want to see people being cured. So I'm looking very much at the right-hand graph here. But what you'll see is remission rates after psilocybin therapy straight away of about 60%, and after about 6 months, close to 70%. Now, these are remarkable remission rates in the world of mental illness. And the beauty of these remission rates is, unlike antidepressants, which so often wear off over time, what's happening here is remission rates are improving over time. Next slide, please. Medicinal MDMA is a different form of therapy, although it takes place in that same sort of room in a clinic or a hospital, decked out to feel comfortable to the patient. It's targeted at post-traumatic stress disorder, where somebody's had some form of trauma in their lives, and the brain can't deal with the trauma. So they're constantly in that fight or flight response. And that's why people with serious PTSD find it so difficult to become full members of our society in terms of jobs, productivity, and so forth, because they're weighed down by the trauma and their inability to deal with it. What happens with MDMA during the medicine session is that the effect of MDMA on a person is to make them feel incredibly comfortable, incredibly loving, incredibly stable. And it's in that environment that they're able to start talking about the events that caused the trauma without triggering the same emotions that they felt during the trauma. And in that sort of state of warmth and stability and comfort, by being able to talk about the trauma, that's actually the road to recovery. So incredibly effective in a medically controlled environment. You'll see on the right some of the stats that are coming out from the trials. With patients with an average of 18 years of treatment-resistant PTSD, so terrible, truly terrible PTSD, The phase 2 trials were showing immediate remission rates of 52%. Now, bear in mind, these are treatment resistant, so nothing else works. 52% immediate remission, rising to 68% over 12 months. So remarkable results. MDMA therapy is now in phase 3 trials, and the first stage of the phase 3 trials have gone incredibly well. And there's an expectation now that this will become prescribable medicine in America, probably within the next 2 years. So very prospective. Next slide, please. I said before that the work is being done primarily on depression and PTSD, but there's also now trials taking place in a host of other areas of mental illness, such as anorexia, dementia, OCD, and particularly substance abuse. There are expanded access schemes now available in America, Switzerland, Israel, and Australia, which enable psychiatrists to apply to use these medicines on a case-by-case basis. The TGA has confirmed that Special Access Scheme B is available in Australia in exactly the same way that it's available with medicinal cannabis. We're also seeing decriminalization movements in America, and in the states of Oregon and California, moves to legalize the medicinal use of psilocybin. So for us in Australia, to me, the key question is the one right at the bottom. How long is it going to take us to actually adopt these therapies in Australia and make serious inroads on the level of mental illness that we have in this country? And how do we make it available to all Australians, not just wealthy Australians? Next slide, please. This slide just really demonstrates the caliber of the research community that's been involved in trials. We've listed here many of the universities around the world that are doing trials, and you'll see that these aren't second or third tier universities, they're top universities. Next slide, please. There's been an enormous number of recent trials. If you look at the history of psychedelic therapy, in the 50s and 60s, when it was legal, it was really seen as the brave new world of psychiatry, and over 40,000 patients were treated with this form of therapy. And then in 1970, the ugliness of politics got in the way, because Richard Nixon was facing the anti-war movement, anyone who's as old as I am will remember that time. You had the hippie movement and the anti-war movement in America. What Nixon did was outlaw drugs in an attempt to get at the leaders of those movements and put them in jail. But the consequence of making those drugs illegal was to dry up funding for research. And you'll see in the graph on the right-hand side that research really just almost came to a standstill. And then some brave researchers started again in the late 1990s. And in the last 20 years, we've seen a massive resurgence in the research behind these therapies. But thanks to Richard Nixon and the way other countries just meekly followed him, we've lost 50 years where these medicines could have been available to treat people suffering from mental illness. Next slide, please. When we started My Medicine Australia 18 months ago, there really were very few companies involved in medicinal psychedelic therapy. But in the last 18 years, we've seen the emergence of a significant number of for-profit companies. It's become very vibrant. These companies are involved in researching the molecules, looking for patents by adjusting the molecules. They're involved in manufacturing, agribusiness, rolling out the therapies. So a whole host of different business models, but there's a lot of them that have been raising capital over the last 12 months. And a number of them look really prospective in terms of being able to develop very viable business models. Next slide, please. In terms of My Medicine Australia, 4 key strategies to developing the ecosystem. The first one is awareness and knowledge building. We've got a major summit taking place towards the end of this year, pandemic willing, which I'd invite anyone who's listening to come to, and those who really want to show their interest in these therapies to sponsor or become one of the sponsors. We're developing a psychedelic therapist program, which will start in January next year to make sure we have qualified therapists. We're developing an Asia Pacific Center of Excellence at one of the universities, which will be world leading. And we're doing a whole host of stuff in terms of accessing the medicines, manufacturing, agribusiness, developing the framework and so forth. Next slide, please. I want to leave you with a quote from Tim Ferriss. You know, those who know of Tim Ferriss, he's one of the leading bloggers in America. He's got a huge number of subscribers to that service, and he's a major philanthropist into the area. And he's put a lot of money, as I say, into psychedelic therapy. And what he says is this, and this applies to philanthropy, but it also applies to business. I view the next 5 years as absolutely a golden window. There's an opportunity to use relatively small amounts of money to have billions of dollars of impact. There just aren't enough opportunities that are so dramatically obvious. If you want to bend the arc of history, I think this is one of the best opportunities you will ever have. As I say, that applies not only to philanthropists, it applies to business people as well. And on the last slide, this is the summit. So, you know, for those of you who want to go up the learning curve, we're bringing, COVID willing, the leaders globally in these therapies to Australia to really get us right up the learning curve quickly so that Australia can adopt these therapies as soon as possible and start to really help all those people out there who are suffering from serious mental illness. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We've got time for some questions. We've got a number of questions, actually. Let's start with the Australian universities. You showed a lot of the US unis there. Where are the Australian universities in terms of trials? Or research, rather?
Well, at the moment, they're nowhere. There's some potential trials emerging, but the Australian universities have been very slow off the mark in terms of participating in this. And one of the key things that we've been doing is making sure that that changes. And we're now having you know, very serious discussions with a leading university in Australia about a centre of excellence. And if it's done on the basis that we're envisaging with that university, it will be one of the leaders, if not the leader in the world in these forms of therapy. So very exciting, but we're coming from a long way behind.
And what about the Therapeutic Goods Authority and, say, Medicare and those regulatory bodies? Where are they in regards to their policy on this?
Well, TGA has been very helpful. They've confirmed that Special Access B is available to psychiatrists, so we can actually use these medicines in Australia, even though they're still Schedule 9. So in terms of accessing these therapies, it's really the same as medicinal cannabis, with the one advantage that these therapies only ever get used in medically controlled environments, so the patient can never take the medicines home. In terms of becoming prescribable medicine, and as you say, being covered by Medicare, that's further away, as it is with medicinal cannabis. But, you know, I think what we need to show first is a real track record in Australia of benefit, and that will carry the government along with us. But we've got to demonstrate first that economically for Australia this makes sense, and we believe it does.
And looking forward, and perhaps putting your investment banker hat back on for the moment, what's the investment opportunity in this space? And is there an opportunity in Australia? We don't seem to have a lot of companies with that sort of background at the moment. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. But again, you go back 5 years and think about medicinal cannabis, and you'd have said exactly the same thing. People saw the opportunities, and that's led to the emergence of a number of cannabis companies. I think we're going to see exactly the same thing with psychedelic therapies in the future. And that's certainly what's happening in North America at the moment.
And one last question, how does Mind Medicine Australia then work with businesses in this space?
Well, you know, as constructively as we can, you know, we're interested in making sure these therapies are available to all Australians, and business will play a major part in doing that. You know, whether it's manufacturing, clinic rollouts, developing the medicines. So, you know, we're there to really help business as much as we can. The only caveat that we put on it is we want to make sure that business works within ethical frameworks, and that these medicines or these therapies are made available to all Australians at prices that are affordable, rather than just wealthy Australians.
Great, thank you, Peter. Our time's up. Really appreciate your time today. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you for your advocacy in this space, and we'll watch with interest how it develops over the next couple of years.
Cheers, Tim.
Thank you. Next up, we have a private company from Canada. It's called Elysium. It focuses on the development of medical devices and therapeutics for specific diseases. We have with us, we've got two presenters actually. We've got the CEO and co-founder, Jonathan Gilbert, and we also have Magsound Dariani, who is the Chief Science Officer. So I'll pass over to them now. Thank you.
There you go. Well, first let me say, Peter, that was terrific. Thank you. Thank you for all your charitable work. The statistics are staggering. It's frustrating that we lost 50 years because of, the president at that time, but it is what it is. I love that Tim Ferriss quote. So thank you, Peter. So let's get into Elysium Biosciences. You have the slide deck up? Great. So Elysium, we're Toronto-based. We're an R&D company. We have multiple patents pending, and we have a research agreement with the Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami. Now, as many of your listeners and watchers may know, Elysium was recently acquired by a public company, Green Star Biosciences, which trades on the Canadian Stock Exchange and is also cross-listed on the US OTC Bulletin Board. The ticker symbol is GSTR in Canada, and it's GTSIF in the United States. Short term, we plan to demonstrate efficacy of our psychedelic therapeutic. It's the combination of psilocybin and NAC. Masoud will get into that in more detail later. But it's specifically for the treatment of mild traumatic brain injury with PTSD or PTSD as a standalone in preclinical rodent models for now. Midterm, we'll be carrying out preclinical studies and preparing for an IND application for submission to the FDA. And of course, concurrently, we're looking at all psychedelics for treatments of various neuropsychiatric disorders. Why don't we flip the page? So I just want to stay here for a second, if you don't mind, and give you a little background on myself now that we're on the biography and management team page. I'm from New York. It's past my bedtime right now, but I'm happy to be here. And I'm a capital markets person. I ran my own broker-dealer for about 20 years in New York, managed a couple $100 million. From there, I took that business to one of the largest hedge funds in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I worked directly under the CIO, who was a disciple of George Soros. While I was there, it was about 2014. So after 25 years in money management, I was alerted to the fledgling cannabis industry and how that could be something to make money in. So besides the potential of making money in cannabis, I was really personally inspired about some anecdotal evidence of its efficacy in treating various disorders and illnesses. My youngest son of 3 suffers greatly with a number of neurological disorders. He's been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. I don't know if many of you know what that is, but he's got Tourette syndrome, also OCD, ADHD, general anxiety disorder, and he also deals with depression. So the idea that CBD or THC at that time could be efficacious, it got me moving, got me very excited and very inspired, as I'm sure you all could imagine. Masoud Dariani and I, who I'll introduce afterwards, Masoud, we launched a startup company. We named it Scythian Biosciences. It was an R&D company utilizing various extractions of cannabis to treat various disorders at that time. We focused eventually on concussion, which I'll get to later. The company was a rousing success. Over time, we raised over $40 million. We rang the bell at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square, obviously going public. The company eventually went on to cultivation of marijuana. And for Masoud and I, that was our first successful exit in the space. I personally went on as executive chairman of an industrial hemp company in Florida and brought some of my knowledge of the cannabis industry to them. And eventually, while I was there, I was alerted, just like I was in cannabis, to the psychedelic industry and how that could be something to move in as far as public markets and creating a business around. So much like I was with cannabis, I was very excited and very inspired, especially if there could be some help for my son in particular, and all people who suffer with so many of these neurological disorders that Peter touched on with all those staggering statistics before. So not only did we put together a company and build something, and have hope for my son, but the idea of creating medicine really felt like a game changer to me. And I knew that psilocybin, MDMA, and all the psychedelic medicines were going to do exactly what cannabis did, if not more. And I'm convinced now that it can do more. What Masood and I did at that time was we got together and we started a company called Ptsd Life Sciences, also an R&D company utilizing psilocybin. We had some combination therapies actually using psilocybin combined with CBD at the time. Interestingly and happily, we were quickly gobbled up. We were acquired by a publicly traded company in the mushroom space called Champignon Brands. So they bought us after only 8 months. So again, our second successful exit in these new industries, now in psychedelics. So, you know, clearly we've become seasoned executives in cannabis and psychedelics. And we quickly got together again for the third time, and I think what will be the most successful time, and started Elysium Biosciences. Why don't we flip the page, please? I'm on my phone, so I'm using my paper. We have some terrific advisors, Dr. Dawn DeCuna, Dr. Shlomo Pinkowski, both bring tremendous medical expertise to our advisory board. And Bart Oates is a former U.S. American football player, played for the New York Giants and the San Francisco 49ers. He is also the president of the NFL Alumni Association. So he takes care of all the ex-players as they go through life. Having played football, you can imagine how many neurological disorders that they may be suffering with because of their 10, 20, 30 years playing such a violent sport. So what we're doing here in our initiative is extremely important to him and to the NFL Alumni Association, and we're proud to have them as partners. NAC is a compound that's already had efficacy in showing, you keep trying, Masood, it's okay, in mild traumatic brain injury. So what we're focused on is treating mild traumatic brain injury in those who also have PTSD or those who have PTSD alone and haven't experienced a concussion at all. NAC is a compound that has already shown efficacy in treating those with concussion. So we've been that far. Now combining it with psilocybin, with everything that we know about it, we feel it'll be increasingly efficacious in treating people with these disorders. Obviously, like I discussed with Bart Oates, this is the next page, Tim. With the application in sports and in the military, we know that that's a place, obviously, where athletes and or military personnel have a tremendous amount of concussion and PTSD. So this is our target market for sure. Next page. One of our patents is what we've been discussing, which is the combination therapy of using NAC and psilocybin together. But our other patent is a medical device. It's called a nasal mist transducer, or an MNT. This device will potentially send medication, in this case, perhaps the psilocybin, but obviously if it works, it can have vast uses in any form of medication for any form of disease. If what we suspect works, this is a medical device using hydraulic. So typically when you use something, if you buy at a local drugstore, just a saline mist that goes up your nose, it goes up, it doesn't work that well. Every doctor has told me that. This will pass the blood-brain barrier more effectively, get the medication to where it needs to go, and obviously will have a better effect. We're right now looking for manufacturers to go out and create this for us and that will be a very exciting addition to our company as a medical device. Next page. As I believe Masood is still working on this. The Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami is the foremost in research when it comes to spinal cord injury and concussion. Arguably, there's no one better in the United States and perhaps the world as far as a research group that could put together a team and study things like concussion, PTSD, and of course, spinal cord injury. When we brought them our nasal mist transducer and our combination therapy idea, they were very excited. They signed on right away. And now we have a stellar research team carrying out our trials. I think this will be very attractive to the market. I think there'll be some good news coming out of this that could hopefully send our stock higher. And Dr. Michael Hoffer, who's obviously the lead researcher, but also someone that has been in the military himself, is extremely excited and focused on our project. So we're excited there. Move to the next slide. Thank you. We're in the preclinical stage now. We're working with rodents, testing our combination therapy. After that, we'll submit for an IND to the FDA. I discussed this in the beginning. And then at some point, 18 to 24 months from beginning, we'll hit human clinical trials. And like I said, one of our 2 compounds has already been proven effective in humans. So we're hoping that we can get a fast track and this can move even quicker than our timeline. But conservatively speaking, we're on an 18 to 24 month timeline to get to that stage. Next slide. That's more of what I was talking about. So it looks like March of 2022, and then beyond would be the run to market. I'm happy to open up to questions. I hope, Masood, you've gotten your audio working by now. He seems to be trying and logging back in. But Tim, you could go right ahead while he's attempting, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Jonathan, the question is, what's the interest in the Australian market? Where do you see Canada positioned relative to where Australia could be?
So the question is, where could Australia be as opposed to where Canada is?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit, given your background, maybe a little bit more, could you elaborate a little bit more on the opportunity globally that you see in this space?
I think the opportunity is limitless. If you saw what happened with cannabis, the psychedelic market, or this sector of the market, is just getting going. Right now, it's literally only in Canada. There's only a handful of companies that are out there raising money and looking to go public and further their studies or whatever they're involved in, regarding the mushroom psilocybin space. I think it's just the beginning. And the companies with real science, with real research, and with executives that know what they're doing, I think will be the one standing in the end, very much just like it happened with cannabis.
And you were recently acquired by a listed company. Is there an opportunity for Australian investors with your company moving forward?
Yes, right now, literally 2 days ago, we signed an LOI. So the deal has not closed yet, but Elysium was a private company. And 2 days ago, we signed an LOI to be acquired by Green Star Biosciences, which is a public company. And once we close, then yes, we will be officially a public company, as Green Star and Elysium will be one.
And any plans to kind of list on Australia as well at some point in the future?
I think a cross-listing to Australia would be in the immediate future, yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for your time today. And we might move on to the next presentation.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the Chairman and CEO of Empower Clinics, Stephen McGawley. Empower owns and operates a network of physician-staffed medical clinics treating more than 165,000 patients in Oregon, Arizona, and through telemedicine. Telemedicine, I'd like to understand what that is. Over to you, and thank you for your time, Stephen.
Right, thanks very much, everyone. Again, really informative from the previous two presenters. And thank you to Peak Asset Management for putting this together and inviting us. As mentioned, my name is Steve McCauley, and I'm the chairman and CEO of a Canadian public company. We trade on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Our ticker symbol is CBDT. We also trade on the OTC markets in the US, and we trade in Frankfurt as well. So I'm coming to you today from Vancouver in Canada, Thursday evening for me. And it's important for me to explain to you just our structure. So we may be a Canadian parent public company, but all of our current operating assets are in the United States. So we own a network of corporate medical health and wellness clinics. We have a franchise program that launched late last year. Our first franchisee has been signed and starts training actually this month. And I want to just describe on the slide a few aspects of our asset base, and then we'll talk about how that's really led into our focus on the psychedelic space going forward. So one of the key strengths for us is scale. So we already have 165,000 patients in our database working across multiple states through physical clinics. We have a big hub in Arizona, particularly out of Phoenix, and also in the Pacific Northwest, so Oregon State, where we have a footprint in Portland, Oregon. And we serve different states across the west and the southwest of the United States through our telemedicine or telehealth platform, and actually seeing patients remotely on a video chat program, exactly like we're kind of going through right now, except medical grade because it has to be HIPAA compliant. We also recently announced the opening of our own psychedelics division called Dosed Wellness. Be operating that both in Canada and the US, and we will really utilize our clinic assets to support what our strengths are, which lie around the patient experience, the journey that the patient takes through the treatment process with us. We should note as well that we're also involved on the product side from a strategy standpoint. We have hemp-derived CBD products. We're not involved with any sort of marijuana or THC type products that dramatically affects our licensing in the United States and how we would operate in Canada. But we currently sell about 50 different SKUs of premium health and wellness products, including functional mushrooms. Jonathan alluded to the fact where functional mushrooms as a product category are going to play a big role. They're important for us today. They probably represent 25% of our SKUs. Half of our SKUs are premium CBD products of various types, and then other complementary wellness products. For us, our IP and our data is ultimately going to be very valuable and important to us. If you think about 165,000 patients in our database, imagine the millions of data points that we capture. When patients come to see us for our medical cannabis certifications or other wellness consultations, they're required to bring with them their prior medical history and then their particular qualifying condition that they are coming to see us for. And patients see us commonly for things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and chronic pain. And that's why plant-based medicines are proving to be such a crucial component of the lives of our patients. We're also vertically integrated in that we're building out our own first hemp extraction and production facility. We've got a 5,000 square foot facility just outside Portland, Oregon. And we, like everybody, got a bit stalled in our development because of COVID-19 and how it impacted North America. But that production is back underway. And we intend to produce our own product lines there. So we're very focused on things like gel caps, tinctures, and ultimately vape cartridges play a big part of the product market in North America. Next slide, please. So, profile for us, we're an existing operating company. We're public. We operate a cash flow positive basis in all our clinics. It's a crucial KPI or milestone for me in terms of how we perform day to day. So we're tremendous at managing the patient experience, but it's also important for us to be good fiscal responsible managers. And we have shareholders to be responsible to, so we need to be able to try to generate the types of returns that shareholders want. We currently do, and all the numbers that we talk about are in US dollars, just as a baseline for everybody. So we currently do about $1 million a quarter in our corporate clinics in the public company. And we're on a very strong path right now to run to sort of that $7 million range and beyond for 2020. And you'll see in 2021, as our extraction and production, sort of the vertical integration comes online, you start to see quite a big lift in the revenue that comes through, and then also the free cash flow, or what we call the EBITDA for the company. Let's go ahead and turn the slide. I wanted to touch on technology and just try to describe to the audience how crucially or how critically important the technology layer is in running a business or a network of businesses like this. So, I'll start at the top and just kind of go around this diagram, but we have very powerful electronic health record systems, and they're required to be HIPAA compliant. And the standards for HIPAA put a lot of responsibility, and it carries risk as a company to protect the personally identifiable information of our patients. And we have to retain those records for many years. We touched on telemedicine, and telemedicine to us is a way for us to remotely treat or consult a patient. It's done through a special platform of ours, through secure video links. And again, it has to be HIPAA compliant because there may be an exchange of private patient data in that consultation. But what it does is it enables us to have efficient reach. We have patients, and particularly today, if you think of COVID-19 and how it's affected our entire global economy, we're currently seeing increases in demand for our video or our telemedicine consultations. Many patients either don't want to come into our clinics or can't come into their clinics because of particular health reasons. This enables us to go to them, maintain the appointment, do the consultation, provide the prescriptions or recommendations as required. I'll touch on e-commerce. So we have our product categories that we sell in our clinics. We also have our own online e-commerce store for all of our products. And we operate a new sort of compound pharmacy format in conjunction with some of the new consultation services, such as immune boosting services that we provide to patients. We have an interactive education platform that we announced a transaction on fairly recently. I'm going to say it's about a month ago. So we've partnered with a platform that is started as a cannabis education platform built in Canada, but it serves global markets. US has the highest traffic, Canada second, and then Germany third. There are over 500 curated articles and courses on this platform. The platform, you can look it up at canvas.me, so CANNVASME. And we are going to continue to build on that platform, particularly as we look at our psychedelics push going forward, because we know it's imperative for us to be thought leaders. And the way to be a thought leader is to provide content and education on the topic. Finally, our database, as I touched on earlier, we have such a huge base of patients. The amount of data that we have available to support research and clinical trials going forward, I think will be a very valuable part of our company and our portfolio. Next slide, please. So I won't touch much on this because the other guys did a great job in sizing market. But if you go from the left, the global wellness market is trillions of dollars. It's not billions, it's trillions of dollars. And mental health, mental illness is a major component of that. And it's, as Peter touched on in the beginning, the troubles that, the escalating problems that you see in Australia, they're exacerbated in our markets as well, whether it's right in my own backyard in Vancouver, where we have tremendous homeless issues and mental health problems, or we look at the US markets that we're serving now. We have 350 million people in the country. There's a terrible growing healthcare issue and problem. And now with our COVID-19 and coronavirus pandemic, we're seeing the mental health side of the equation being even more troublesome than ever before. So let's go to the next slide, please. About 8 weeks ago, I started to let the market know our intent to strongly move into the psychedelics world, starting off with a focus on psilocybin, but it's pretty clear already that MDMA is moving along at quite a rapid pace and may even accelerate past psilocybin in its go-to-market. And obviously, ketamine is already an FDA-approved treatment option for the United States, and it's something that we're going to begin to access going forward. Now, we created a division called Dosed Wellness, and I'll encourage you to go and look up a movie called Dosed Movie, which is a movie that was shot here in Vancouver by two directors and producers, Tyler Chandler and Nick Myers. We've announced a transaction we're close to completing where Empower Clinics, the public company, is going to take a 10% ownership interest in Dosed Movie as an opportunity to help promote the movie and the story, and further to access the network and the reach of the producer and directors. And those two gentlemen will actually join our team at Dosed Wellness as part of the launch team that we'll push from here in Vancouver. We believe that our clinic assets, our ability to manage patients, our technology makes us one of the most ideal, at least public companies, to be serving the psychedelics industry. We are really wanting to take advantage of being an early mover in the space and leverage the assets that we already have. We're actively looking for other clinic group acquisitions throughout the United States and in Canada. And we will definitely take a strong look at what is available in international markets, Australia. And as a background, I was actually born in Sydney, so I've got a strong affinity to the Australian market. So it'd be nice to potentially operate in that market. Next slide, please. So finally, I'll leave this off the slide for people to read offline, but what we are really focused on trying to be a change agent for mental health and to really help forward the advancement of research and actually the process of providing therapies to patients using these plant-based medicines. We also want to be a leader in bringing down the stigma, and thought leadership and providing better access to information communication through some of our platforms is the way to help bring down the stigma in a manner similar to what we saw with the path of cannabis, going from medical cannabis and in our markets to full recreational. Final slide, please, I think is Q&A. So thanks very much for your time and attention. I'm happy to take some questions if you have them.
Thanks, Stephen. You seem to have lost your Australian accent, I might add.
Yeah, I have.
Just in regards to the Australian medicinal cannabis market, do you have any views there, particularly around the producers?
I don't know if it's so much around the producers themselves. We did a lot of research actually in conjunction with Peak Asset Management and with Niv. And Niv and I spent a great deal of time while he was in Vancouver talking about the Australian market. And so we did a lot of research. We got introduced to other companies in Australia. We had a lot of conversations. And I think the market, the market is very nascent compared to where we are in Canada, or we see in North America how the markets have grown so rapidly. I think the market will come along if how certain states, if you take Arizona right now, Arizona is a medical state, it's likely to convert to full recreational even in this presidential cycle. We see states like Oregon and Washington State that went to full recreational, and we started there as a medical program and then graduated with it. I think Australia will get there. There's undeniable benefits for patients. We see patients every single day. We see thousands of patients per month. And, so we are at the point where, patients communicate to us how their lives have changed by getting access to these plant-based treatment options. We are convinced that the psychedelic sector as a whole is as important and will play an even more important role potentially in mental health on a global basis.
And also, you talk about being an early mover. How many companies are listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange in regards to this sort of space?
So in psychedelics, I mean, it's a handful. I mean, I do not feel, if I go down the list quickly, it's not 10. Yeah. And, but I tell you what we are seeing and why this is important. So, you know, we as a company, although we're not plant touching in cannabis or medical cannabis, we certainly were associated with the basket of goods of Canadian licensed producers. And we suffered that pullback over the last 12 months in market valuation and a lot of the big sell-off. We have had to work very hard to separate ourselves. And for us, this movement into leveraging our assets, and these are active assets, we actively generate cash today, we're really good at operations, to use it to pivot and put more energy into the psychedelic space is rewarding us in much greater liquidity over the last 3 months for our stock. We're trading millions of shares per day when we were trading, you know, 50s and hundreds of thousands per day last year. We are raising money more easily, more successfully. And we have a new private placement that I just pushed to the market 2 days ago. And the quick adoption and flow of subscriptions and funds into it is an indicator of the investment community's desire to support the psychedelics movement.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for your time this afternoon.
So welcome. Thank you.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you for all for your time. Apologies for those technical issues. It's not easy at times having different speakers from different states in different countries. So we appreciate your time. There'll be a copy of this presentation online early next week. See you later.